when your legs don't work like they used to before.
Well, good evening. As you know, my name is Sonya Romero, and I have 3 important things that are important to me that I'd like to share with you. Number 1 is, of course, my family. I'm a mother first and foremost, a single mother at that. Every decision I make comes from being a mother. From the time I made the decision to undergo a double mastectomy in a very deliberate and purposeful way to have every precious moment with my family, to deciding if I was able to provide for 2 foster children. Number 2, my purpose. I believe I have many. I'm a teacher, I'm an activist, I'm a part of this human experience. So I'm deeply rooted in serving others. Albert Einstein once said, "Only a life lived in the service of others is worth living." That is who I am at my core. And number 3, my history, both in my successes and in my failures. My past has set the foundation for my future and has been a roadmap for where I am today. For example, I teach at an F school, which is meant to imply that we have failed our students. But I want you to consider who might have failed us. It took me some time to find out these things and to understand why they are at the top of my list. But I will hope that you will use my experiences as a point of origin for you to consider your priorities and how you will act on your own priorities. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I became a teacher because a teacher inspired me. That teacher was my grandfather, Sonya Romero. When I was a child living in Puerto Rico, my grandfather regularly sent me books, and I would read those books into a tape recorder to practice my English. I would anxiously await his reply to see if I read the book correctly. I still have the very first book he gave me, Dandelion by Don Freeman. I remember asking my first grade teacher, "Maestra, ¿qué es un dandelion?" As Spanish was how I mostly communicated. She had no idea what I was talking about. But my grandfather understood my Spanglish. One summer I went to visit him in Peñasco, New Mexico, and I asked him, "Grandpa, what is a dandelion?" Well, he could have laughed at me. Instead, he said, "Mijita, how did you know that's how we say dandelions up in these parts?" His enthusiasm of my pronunciation made me feel valued and special, and I never forgot that feeling. To this day, I still think of him when I see dandelions. I am told that my grandfather was like this with everyone. You see, teaching was his first love. He was a brilliant man. He could read and write and speak fluently in English, Spanish, and Latin. My grandmother once told me that he had the opportunity to teach at a prestigious university, but chose to stay in his beloved community to serve his people. This example was paramount to me. Let me explain why. When I began teaching, I knew that I had the potential to make an impact, and I knew I wanted to give back and that teaching was my calling. I knew it from the very first day I walked into my classroom, but I longed for a deeper understanding of my students. But in order to do that, I realized I'd have to fully connect with them, their families, and the community. One particular experience was the stepping stone for where I am today. Several years ago, a very frightened and quiet kindergarten child was dropped off in my classroom the very first day of school. I knew nothing about him or of his family, as they didn't come to meet the teacher that year. That particular morning, his mother left him, and he ran for my classroom door. My fear was that he was going to run into the streets, into our busy downtown neighborhood. When I turned my back for just a second, he bit the back of my calf so deeply that he ripped the skin off and there was blood everywhere. He was screaming in fear, and I spent that day in the emergency room. So for the next year, I had to receive a series of hepatitis shots, and I was tested for HIV for 2 years due to the unknown nature of this family's story. What I didn't know at the time was that this child and his family had many struggles beyond what I had ever experienced before. Worse yet, his family had little or no access for support or even knowledge as to how to gain support. This child, this 5-year-old child, was on 5 different types of psychotropic drugs, and his parents couldn't read. I was asked if I wanted him transferred out of my classroom, and I said, absolutely not. We will all figure this out together. So I started asking questions. I asked my fellow educators. I asked questions of my union, and I asked my professors here at UNM, how can I help this family? I quickly learned that as an educator, part of my job was to advocate for the voiceless children and voiceless families. That was a moment that I truly understood that teaching was more than just academics, and it is what teachers do. Many years have passed since that child left my classroom, but I'm still very connected to this child and his family because I feel a profound connection to him as a human being. While I understand that his circumstances far exceed what I alone can fix, I can still be an advocate for him and for his family many, many years beyond that kindergarten year. What I learned from that was that our voices and our stories reflect our realities, and they need to be shared. Without hesitation, I volunteered, and I began to march, and I began to act, and I began to speak. I went to Washington, D.C. that summer, and I rallied with my fellow educators. I proudly carried our New Mexico state flag and our union banner in solidarity. From that experience, I was inspired to become a teacher of teachers within my union, where I could support and collaborate wonderful educators in my profession. I still teach those classes to this day. That then led to my election as Executive Vice President of the Albuquerque Teachers Federation, where I am privileged to support the incredible professionals in my district. When I was a graduate student here at UNM with the Teacher Enhancement Program, my professors taught me that in order to be the best at my job meant that I had to engage in all things that would advocate for children. The most meaningful lesson for me was that my classroom was a barometer of learning. In other words, if my children felt safe, they could learn. Well, there are different ways that children, and all people for that matter, feel safe. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially. But the one thing that interferes with children feeling safe is poverty. And poverty matters. That phrase has changed my life. Here is how I learned that. I was at a union meeting speaking about the impact of testing in children with poverty, and I raised my hand in frustration and I said, I understand poverty now from a totally different point of view, now that I have 2 foster children living with me, and poverty matters. I said, I've taught all of these years, and I've seen the faces of poverty, but to have it in my home has forever changed me. When my foster daughters don't know the difference between a stomachache and hunger, or when I wake up to check on them in the middle of the night and I find them sleeping on the floor, because that is where they are used to sleeping, is when I fully understood that poverty was far deeper than not having money. It was a chronic crisis state of mind that I knew would take a whole lot more than just having in my home and providing them food and shelter. There was a root that I needed to dig deeper, to honor and to acknowledge. A national report was released in 2014, and it showed that 51% of the children in this country are living in poverty. In the state of New Mexico, that is at 68%. We already knew this. I live this every day. Educators live this every day. Well, that truth led to my union president asking me if I would be willing to speak to the Washington Post about that one statement, poverty matters. I spoke with them and I shared stories of my teachers, my students, as well as my foster daughters. They asked me what a typical day in my class was like, and I said, this is a typical day for many teachers. When they come into our classroom in the morning, we do an inventory of immediate needs. Have they eaten? Are they ready to learn? Are they safe? The rest went viral. In the midst of all of this, one of my foster daughter's social workers nominated me for a Pay It Forward award. And all of that garnered attention from the Ellen DeGeneres show. And as you saw, I received a check for $10,000 and my school an additional $10,000. We also received additional donations, well over $10,000, gifts, letters of support, and hundreds of emails from all over the world of people wanting to make a difference in what mattered deeply to them. One of the most profound emails, and I apologize, letters that I received was from an inmate, where she said, "I might be in jail, but I'm still a human," and she gave me her $5 commissary check. All of this has been an incredible honor. However, an honor only becomes more than one moment when you do something bigger or beyond this moment. As much as I love being honored, I want you all to think deeply about investing your honors for the greater good. Be proud of this moment. You earned it and you deserve it, but do not let it stop here. Here's how I chose to keep my moment going. I've collaborated with my fellow colleagues, and we have thought mindfully and intentionally of how we would use that seed of money to plant something lasting for children. Because I feel that this experience is not about me as a person, but rather as teachers. I have used my voice in interviews with several national publications about poverty, and as a collective message of all teachers. I have joined organizations that will promote our message that poverty matters, and I have gotten more involved politically. I have spoken at school board meetings, union meetings, and now here with you. My biggest takeaway from all of this is that the conversation should never stop with you or I. As you enter the world, remind yourself that we are all citizens of this planet, and in order to shift the center of gravity, we all must move to higher ground. And we do that by asking the right questions that lead to the right answers about whatever it is that we care deeply. For example, for my fellow colleagues and myself, the right question to change the lives of our most vulnerable children is, how do we get rid of poverty? Well, I'd like to believe that education is a great equalizer, and it can be, but only if all of you business majors, lawyers, doctors, future professionals, and future leaders help change a system that oppresses some in order to benefit others. It is clear that all children can learn, which includes children of poverty, but what they need is access, and that is where you come in. Every career is connected and should be rooted in a moral narrative of a collective whole. Every great leader knew this because they knew that today's decisions were tomorrow's reality. So now that you're at the end of your semester and you're just about graduating, here is your final homework assignment. I want you to find your most important priority, hold true to the vision that they express, and make sure that you make it count. Thank you for having me.